welcome back to the Prosperous Empath. Kat here. Oh, friends, you were in for such a treat today on the podcast. Oh, I am digging in today with Rebecca Jo-Rushdy about a topic that is really fundamental to who I am and have always been. And I never thought about it from this perspective, from the perspective around how decluttering and creating physical and mental space can make such a difference in up-leveling and transforming our mindset, what's possible for us, and our experience of our lives. Today, I'm really thrilled to be joined by Rebecca. She and I, we met recently. I think she signed up for my newsletter, and I was just so inspired by her website and what she's up to that I reached out to her out of the blue and invited her to join me on the show. In her work, Rebecca guides sensitive souls on transformational journeys by decluttering their homes, hearts, and minds into sanctuaries that spark joy and flow. As a recovered shopaholic and drawing on her lived experiences, she's now dedicated to helping other highly sensitive people turn their wounds into wisdom and their exhaustion into energy. Rebecca and her family hail from Edinburgh, Scotland, where they're currently residing. And she is a world traveler and world citizen. We share so many values and life experiences. And I really hope you enjoy the episode today. We're going to really dive into some of the magic and some of the neuroscience behind decluttering, as well as talking about how decluttering is not just a physical journey, but it's also an emotional one. How it can support you in turning your own wounds into wisdom, and how embracing more minimalism in your life, creating more physical space, can allow you to really hone in on what is most important and most meaningful for you. If you're looking for an opportunity to connect with me and my community in person, I really want to invite you to join us for our next non-networking power hour. It is our monthly gathering where fellow empathpreneurs come together and ask for meaningful support while creating hugely valuable and values-aligned collaborations. Our next one coming up is on Monday, July 15th at 12 noon Eastern Time. We will drop the link as well as the link to join our private community in the show notes for today's episode. I hope you enjoy, and let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Prosperous Empath podcast, designed especially for empaths and highly sensitive entrepreneurs just like you who are committed to achieving holistic success. I'm your host, Catherine Wood, Master Certified Coach, author, mastermind leader, and founder of Unbounded Potential, a boutique coaching firm for empathic entrepreneurs. I'm on a mission to bring empathy back into the world of business. Each episode will focus on achieving more by doing less, through leveraging empath-friendly leadership practices, boundaries, rituals, and systems, all the while continuing to care deeply about ourselves, others, and the world around us. If you are committed to joyful living and running a conscious business, but amassing wealth while doing so, proving that you can have both in a society that tells you you can't, then you are in the right place. Join me here each week to find out how. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review so you won't miss an episode. Plus, you'll find all the show notes and helpful resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Rebecca, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Kat. I'm so excited to be here chatting with you today.
I don't know if you know this about me, but I am an extreme neatnik. And my parents ran a bed and breakfast growing up. So I'm just very orderly and tidy. And so having you on the show today to talk about decluttering our spaces and our minds and our energy fields feels like just a magical conversation. So I'm really excited to jump in.
I know. I was so excited too. That's how we connected, right? And I was like, oh, I love it. Another person to geek out over the magic and the science of, a decluttered space, a decluttered physical space, and also the mental space. Totally. And it sounds like, you had that foundation set up for you growing up. there's a home for everything, right? Especially running a bed and breakfast.
Yeah. And you know what? I absolutely did. And it had its joys. It also had its sadnesses, which, we may get into in your own line of work. But so by way of helping us kind of land today, I'd love for you to share your pronouns. And then I'd love for you to share a little bit about your story. I think we really learn about each other and our journeys through storytelling. So I'm really excited to hear a little bit of yours.
So my pronouns are she, her, and my story is actually a lot more complicated than people think. Like I've always wished that I could just wrap it up in this neat and tidy, one sentence to just be like, oh, I'm from LA. I grew up, I'm American, whatever it might be. But in reality, I am a global citizen. I was born in LA and I grew up in Japan, Hong Kong, Shanghai, New York. So all over the place. And I've attended 9 schools by the time I was 18 as well.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's really nomadic because, I think it runs in the blood because my parents were the same way too. They're both Chinese, but my mom was born and raised in Korea. My dad was born in Hong Kong, but was raised in Japan and Taiwan. So we were like all over the place. And I used to hold that as almost like a weakness. Like I would actually have an aversion to people asking me this simple question of where are you from? So these are the things that along the way, it's not just the decluttering of our physical space, but also being able to delve into our emotional space to be able to turn wounds into wisdom. And we'll be diving into this as well with our conversation because it's through the physical that we're able to create more confidence as well to be able to face the things that are, it's almost like we have things that are shoved in a closet or swept under a rug, but that's internal. And these are the things that we'll be able to delve into further from practicing the art of letting go with gratitude.
So I'm really struck by your story because if you grew up as a world citizen, and I know that you identify as a recovering shopaholic. So I'm just imagining even just the practicality of how do you be a world citizen with a penchant for shopping? How do you live and move abroad between countries with so much stuff?
Yeah, you just, you get used to it. But also on the other hand, because even though I grew up as a shopaholic, it was always tidy. So it wasn't an issue, right? Like, okay, yes, maybe financially it was an issue, but because, sometimes you go into people's homes, you can see it's very visual that it is a problem. It's overtaking their life. I think for me, it was being able to let go. I was a shopaholic, but I had always been able to clear the clutter. So when I read Marie Kondo's book about, 10 years ago now, so The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up, when I came across that book, I was actually heavily pregnant at that time. And when I read the book, I was like, oh my gosh, I've been tidying wrong my entire life. And that was the shift. So the philosophy itself is to focus on what you want to keep. And when we're able to touch those items and really reflect on, why did I purchase this? What kind of frame of mind was I in? Was I feeling pressured by society or other people? Right? Like, so when we're able to really have that moment of stillness, we're like, oh, this doesn't spark joy, but we go deeper into the why. Then we can actually let it go with gratitude. It's like, oh, you know what? Like that was an impulse purchase, or, oh, I felt pressured from the salesperson.
How are you doing it?
Yeah. And you're actually like, hey, you know what? Thank you so much. I now know that I don't have to feel obliged to buy this thing that my friends are selling. Right. And then so that's where we're able to link it as well. And that's where the behavioral patterns changes and those changes come about.
Mm.
So yeah. And then so when I was able to reflect, because, for me, it was filling that void, the void that could never, that bottomless void that could never be filled, because I was addicted to the dopamine of shopping. And I was so deeply unhappy with myself. I just was always trying to, and I lived in I lived in mega cities where it's basically a giant shopping mall. It's everywhere as well. So being able to reflect on it. And then also on a practical note, when you have a full mental audit of what you own, then it just makes it easier to make conscious decisions. You might go into the shop and be like, oh, that's like a really cool t-shirt. And then you're like, hang on, actually, I have 2 t-shirts similar, but I'll keep this in mind for next time. So it's not feeding into the scarcity of like, oh, I'm not allowed to buy anything. It's more like, oh, I have enough. So it really feeds into this notion of defining what's enough for you. Yeah. So that's really how the method changed my life. And it was very, very gentle. It didn't feel like I was losing out on anything because of the way you go through your items as well. You do so with a lot of reverence and respect. And then that's where you're like, oh, I have more than enough. And you feel that satisfaction.
So I'm wondering, I am an avid reader, and I've also read The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. And I don't know if I necessarily had a similar transformation like you did, because I've always kind of been a minimalist at heart. I've always really valued having less and loving what I have.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm curious about the kind of like your journey with reading the book, having this epiphany, and then making this really big life transformation. Because I think many of us read personal development books or leadership books or self-leadership books. And so was it the book alone that kind of caused this light bulb moment for you, or were there other moments of change or hardship that really kind of caused it to be like, okay, now's the time. This is it.
Yeah, I and this is also why I've also pivoted to work with the highly sensitive community as well, because what I realized is that it's a beautiful practice to be able to cultivate confidence, to be able to define what truly lights you up, and to be able to practice saying no without the shame and guilt that we're often burdened with. So it might seem really basic, you're just practicing on your own belongings, like, does it spark joy? Does it spark joy? But the more we go into it, it's actually, it's carving out and strengthening those neural pathways. Because a lot of times, how many of us say yes to the things that we really want to say no to, and no to the things that we really need help on, right? So by practicing on our belongings, and this is also why it's so gentle, because by the time, I don't know if you remember, but there's 5 categories in total with the method. So we start with clothing, books, paper. Komono means miscellaneous in Japanese. And then the last category is sentimental items, because, this is also why a lot of people struggle with decluttering, because we go into the high intensity categories. It's like, oh, I'm going to do my kitchen, right? Oh, I'm going to do this drawer of doom. But actually, or I'm going to go into my photo memory box. Like that's a recipe for, failure, essentially. So when we go through the sequence, you're essentially building up your muscle. And then so by the time we get to those high intensity, those, either, whether it's memories or the physical objects as well, it's like, it's charged with a lot of energy, right? Then we're able to recognize, we're like, okay, yeah, I see where, oh, I'm still carrying those wounds around with me. I'm still carrying those negative memories around with me. And then the practice is through gratitude. We always let it go with gratitude, because gratitude is what softens the edges. So with my journey, because it is a journey. It's not just like, oh, once you're done, you're done. It creates that foundation to set us up for, to be able to maintain and manage all of our belongings, through the days to come. And as humans, we are constantly evolving. So we actually call it joy checking. So I'm constantly joy checking still. I'm not the same person as I was 10 years ago when I started this journey, right? And when the harder conversations do come up, then we're well versed in practicing just sitting with the emotions. You're like, oh, this feels a little bit sticky inside of me, or this is actually activating me, and being able to go a little bit deeper into it. So in our case, about a year after I started my KonMari journey, my husband, we had this discussion. Like it was very confronting. I've always thought that I was going to raise my children in Hong Kong, where we were living at that time. Just because that's where I spent a bulk of my childhood, even though we moved around so much. But I was like, okay, like this is the path to follow. It's just unconscious. You're not even thinking about it. You're like, this is the path to follow. My husband did not enjoy living there, and it was always a point of contention. And so when we finally talked about it about a year after I started KonMari, I was able to, hold that space and then really look at it introspectively. It's like, hang on, is this a path that is true to my family, or am I just following someone else's journey? And then so with that, we took the plunge. We KonMari the city that we lived in. And then we took a family gap year for an entire year with no destination, with no final destination in mind.
Wow, that sounds magical.
Yeah. So if it weren't for the fact that, we had been practicing the KonMari method, like, I don't think I would have had that courage.
That's beautiful. And so I'm just thinking about your journey. And maybe I'm so fascinated in your journey because it started when you were pregnant, which I'm pregnant now. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I'm in the thick of baby registries and what I need versus what I want versus what everyone has. And how the heck do I figure out the answers to those different questions when I don't even know? Yeah. So you took a gap year right at the beginning of when you started your business, when you were perhaps recently a new mom. Is that the trajectory?
We took a gap year. So by the time we started the gap year, I had my second child.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Right. So it's like, we had the conversation, and then it was the preparation, right? Of like leaving the country and, like leaving jobs, all of that. So our kids were not even one and under 3.
Amazing.
Like 8 months. The youngest one was 8 months when we started. Yeah.
Wow.
And my eldest was like not even 3 years old yet.
And you had just started your business recently.
I didn't even start KonMari at that time. Yeah. Yeah. I had another business at that time, but because even with the KonMari journey, like I've been practicing KonMari for over a decade now, but professionally 4 years.
So can we talk, and maybe this is just for me, but it could also be for our listeners who are pregnant or expecting. How do you KonMari motherhood?
Oh, that is such a good question. In terms of making it work for you?
Yeah, in terms of being mindful about, just focusing on what we need, not bringing additional clutter into the home from a place of fear or anxiety or social pressure.
And that's a huge one, because we have to remember that the marketing preys on our fears and insecurities. And what better segment of humans to target than new parents, because we have like no idea what's going on. So like even in the practical sense, right? Whenever I have clients who are new parents, I always tell them, how they have this checklist of like essentials? Yes. I'm always like, look at it with a grain of salt, because you have to be able to reflect back on your lifestyle. Let's say, for example, if you're going to be washing clothes every day, every other day, you're not going to need to have that volume. So you get to decide, what is that enough? What is that number of, the pieces of items of clothing that you'll need? versus someone else. Like if another family, they're only doing their laundry every 2 weeks, then they're going to need a lot more of onesies and blankets and whatnot, right? So, and it's just really, it always goes back to reflecting on your ideal lifestyle. What is your ideal family lifestyle? What is your ideal motherhood? Of course, with a bit of the flexibility, because, um, expectations are the thief of joy as well. So being able to just look deeply into how do I want to raise my children, and not get so bogged down by the stuff. And another reminder is also, depending on where you live, more often than not, you can get everything within like a day or two now. So if there's something that you don't have, that's fine, like just get it as you need, right? So then we don't have to have that pressure of like, oh, I need all of the gear, Yeah.
I really appreciate, you said this the last time we chatted, and I really appreciate the reinforcement that marketing preys on anxiety and fear. And I think for those of us who are expecting, and particularly those of us who are going to be first-time moms, I know for me, like I'm not anxious. Like I don't suffer from anxiety. But I've done a lot of work to not suffer from anxiety, more than a decade of work. And I read some of these forums and blogs, and there's so much anxiety among the first-time mom community, and particularly for those of us who are who are in advanced maternal age, who've already benefited from a whole career before jumping into parenthood and maybe have struggled with fertility. So I can really appreciate that reminder that we have to really bring that knowing, that awareness of how we're being targeted.
Oh yeah, 100%, and it's everywhere, right? Like that's why they want all of your data as well, like even in the hospital, right? Because all the companies are working with the hospital so that the baby, you're like all registered in the database so that it's targeted advertisement as well. So yeah, just understanding it. And then I think, when we also have the knowledge of what we own already, it makes it easier to make conscious decisions of what you want to bring into the house. So even as the child gets older as well, this is a beautiful practice to bring in because it's developing their self-awareness. So even for my 9-year-old, I mean, she's 10 now, but when she was 9, because we joy check through the clothing and books, and it sounds scary, but it's not, because it really doesn't take much time because you're filtering what's coming into your house. So when you're doing the joy checking, it's really effortless. And it's a really great way to connect with your child too. So my child, she was like 9 at that time, and she said to me, she was like, she had her click point. I always call it the click point, like, so with clients, they'll say, I have more than enough. They're like, oh, right. And then she also had it. She was like, oh, I have more than enough toys. I don't need any toys. So and it's from their own accord. So that's where the empowerment comes from, because nobody is telling you that you can't buy this or you can't own this, right? So when you make these conscious decisions from yourself, you feel that contentment and satisfaction. So it's not the parents saying like, oh, no, you can't buy any of this. And this is also where we bring it into conversations, in our day-to-day life. Like, of course, when we go into shops, children are going to be like, oh, like, I really want that toy. And then we can, rather than just saying no, we can have a dialogue around it. It's like, oh, remember you had something similar, you let it go last time, or we bought it and then you maybe didn't play with it too much, right? So, or even we can have conversations around sustainability. It's like, oh, like, let's try not to buy things that have excessive plastic packaging. Maybe we can buy it through a secondhand platform. Mm-hmm. So this is also a really wonderful way to just nurture the parent-child relationship as well. So it's not like, oh, obey my command, right? Which happens as well. But you're armed with knowledge.
Oh, I love this. This is
Mhm.
so timely and relevant.
Yeah.
Can we just talk about joy checking for a
Oh,
moment? So for
yes.
those of
Yes.
us who would love to, so my husband and I are going to be moving
Yeah. Oh,
in the
congratulations.
near future.
Mhm.
So this is very relevant for us. So as we really look at kind of joy checking our possessions, and we have a lot of possessions in storage right now. So how do we approach joy checking our
Mm.
stuff, our clutter?
I love this. This is also why I am so passionate about teaching this to the highly sensitive community, because it is just so it's so nourishing, right? Because most of the time, what do we think of when we're like, oh, I gotta declutter, I gotta tidy? Most of the time people are like, there's an aversion to it. There might be a little bit of panic as well. But the way that we approach it, first of all, is through the categories, right? So you're breaking it down into manageable pieces. And then, so we start with the clothing component, but even within clothing, you can even break it down further into subcategories. Let's say, like, I'm just going to check my shoes today. I'm just going to check my swimsuits today. Right. And then this actually calms our brain because you're only looking at the swimsuits or the shoes. You're able to see the lay of the land. And then we go into, this is the key point. We go into what do we want to keep? Because most of the time with the negativity bias in our brains, we go straight into what do I want to get rid of? So this is also why the philosophy helps us to focus on the positive. It is a brain training exercise as well. So when we're able to be like, okay, these are my favorite, no question about it, full body, yes, love these swimsuits. And then when you look at the other items, then you just know it's also a way to strengthen your intuition as well. You just know, you're like, ooh, there's a little bit of resistance with these pieces. And then you can sit still with it. Sometimes it might be, oh, I spent a lot of money on it, or, oh, it's just a size too small. That was an impulse purchase, or whatever it might be. And then the practice is we use gratitude to let those go. It's like, thank you
Mhm.
so much. Like, I now know that I don't have to squeeze myself into this. It doesn't feel good on my body. Or I now know that I don't need to make these impulse purchases. Right. And that's what we carry away with us. So those are the lessons that we learn. And then we can let go of the physical objects. We're still hanging on to the wisdom that it has taught us. So when we start with that, when we start with what we want to keep, it actually calms us. We feel that abundance as well. You're like, oh, I have all of these. And you might be like, hey, you know what? I need to upgrade this. Or, oh, I have a gap in my closet. And so this is where the conscious consumption comes in. So it becomes joyful. We're actually adding extra joy into purchasing mindfully.
Mm.
Yeah. So this is what makes it fun. It's also a trip down memory lane, right? Because you'll go through things in storage too, and you're like, oh, that meant a lot to me back then, and it doesn't represent who I am now or who I'm becoming.
Mhm.
I'm ready to let go of it. I don't need the physical item.
I'd love to jump back a moment because
Yeah.
you talked about um, like the learning that, oh, I this was an impulse buy, and I can
Yeah.
appreciate that this item doesn't fit me anymore, and I can let it
Mm-hmm.
go. And as someone who's currently bigger than
Yeah.
I intend to be
Yeah.
in the next year,
Mm-hmm.
and having, I'm a very intentional shopper, and I have lots of items that I love and don't fit in, but also
Mm-hmm.
didn't fit in right before pregnancy either.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question is, if they still spark joy, but they're not practical because they don't currently fit your current shape and form,
Mm-hmm.
um, then what?
Oh yeah. So I love doing this with you know, I don't want to say exclusively women, because I've also worked with men whose like weight fluctuates a lot as well. So what we do is, for your closet, keep it to what's current. right? Because this also helps to preserve mental bandwidth. Because when you go into a closet and they're like, oh, this doesn't really fit. Oh, this one, I'm not sure if it fits, like it actually is leaking energy from you. So we keep the closet, the main closet, to current. And then the things that we want to keep, so like post-pregnancy, we call them goals, right? Because it's also just to make sure that we have a healthy relationship. You're not trying to force yourself to become a size, but rather it's like, I want to be the healthiest version of myself. So it doesn't become, because especially for women, we're like, our bodies are weaponized, right? Like this is what we're shown and this is what we grow up with. So rather than feeling like, oh, I need to be this size, right? It's like, no, I'm going to be the healthiest version of myself. I can see myself wearing this when I reach those goals. And so it becomes like we're keeping things with confidence rather than keeping it out of shame.
I mean, I think that makes total sense. Like keeping things with intentionality and purpose, not from a place of shame or make wrong or guilt.
Yeah.
I love the piece about keeping your closet current.
Yeah.
Because then it's not only allowing you to focus on what you have right now, what works for you right now, but it's also allowing you to make that mental space to take advantage, to enjoy what you have more.
And it optimizes your time and energy as well. Because every time we're trying to look for something and you can't find it, your cortisol levels are rising. So just from the moment, I mean, and these are things that are absolutely within our control, right? Like things that happen, like, if there's traffic or, something happens with the family, meltdowns, those aren't within our control. But there are so many things like making sure that your space, your physical space support you, that is within our control. And our space should never be a source of stress. It's a sanctuary for us empaths to charge up in.
Oh, I love this conversation. As you were speaking, I was thinking of one of my dear friends is a personal stylist. And I was reading her newsletter recently, and she recommended that if you have items that you don't know whether they spark joy or not, to just start turning the hangers around I don't know if it's once you've worn an outfit. I think it's once you've worn an outfit. And then at the end of the season or the year or whatever your quarterly joy check season is, to just notice, which are the items that you've actually touched and worn or used and which aren't.
Yeah. And it's really about keeping it with confidence, right? Because previous to, I'm in Edinburgh in Scotland right now. Prior to living here, I was in Malaysia in Kuala Lumpur, and it was like tropical. So I wasn't wearing my winter stuff, like barely touched it, but it was, where it is, right? And it's the intentionality. You're like, and also just imagining yourself, you're like, okay, if I do go to a cold weather place, then is this something that I want to be wearing? I also used this exercise during the pandemic with all my evening wear, like, because obviously we weren't going to events at that time. I just looked at them. I just had like a hard and intentional look at them. I was like, okay, if I were to be invited to a wedding, would I actually want to wear this?
Yeah.
And then the answer was, I was like, no, and I also started thinking, I was like, okay, I probably will want to just rent something. Like it's my mindset has also shifted into, it's not about ownership, like I don't want to just keep something that I'm only going to wear like once or twice as well. And then just being grateful. It's like, oh, times have changed. Like there's so many of these platforms as well. Right. And so it's like one of my clients actually said to me, she's like, oh, joy checking is like having a date with yourself to check in with where you're at now and where you're heading.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I mean, as you were talking, I was even just thinking about some of the clothes that I have. And I think for me, clothes hold a lot of sentimentality because I have often used clothes or buying special items as moments of significance or celebration. I've had a tradition since I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Dominican Republic that every year on my birthday, I buy myself a special item from Anthropology. So, I was in the Peace Corps in 2006 to 2008. So now I have over 15 years of like special significant items, several of which don't fit me anymore or are outdated. And those are so hard to let go of because of all the memories attached to them.
Yeah. And that's another question, especially when it comes to sentimental. So we're gonna come across sentimental items in every single category, right? From clothing all the way down to the sentimentals. But it's also just asking yourself, can the memory live on without the memento? Yeah. And you know what? Sometimes we're just simply not ready, and that's okay. So for me as a KonMari consultant, like I think sometimes people get the misconception. They're like, oh, Rebecca, like, the spouse might be like, oh, the Rebecca's coming. Is she going to make me throw things? So I was like, no, that's not the method at all. It's just holding space, right? So it's almost like I kind of compare myself to like a personal trainer. So people can make these decisions in a safe space and be able to hear their thoughts and come to the conclusion. It's like, oh, you know what? Like, I know that I have a little bit of resistance towards this item, but I'm not ready yet. And that's okay, because it's really all about cultivating the emotional readiness. So you might come across these, you might go and look at these anthropology items and you'll be like, oh, you know what? Like, maybe by the next joy check, I know that the time is coming soon. You just know it inside of your heart, right? Yeah. But there's no force. There's no force because it's the practice of the letting go. It becomes effortless and it comes from a place of joy. It comes from a place of empowerment. So that's what the practice is. And it is a letting go practice. We aren't taught how to let go, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
I wanna dig in here a little more because you've mentioned this theme around resistance, right? This is not a process of resisting. It's a process of letting go, and many people resist getting organized and decluttering, and many people really struggle with it. And so, in your experience, why is that? Like, why do we struggle getting organized or decluttering? Like, what do you notice that has to do with?
Oh, it more often than not, we have to delve into our lineage, our background. Like for you and me, we grew up in like pretty tidy households, right? So we have that to model from. But for a lot of people, they've never been taught. They've lived in, especially I know a lot of people, they live in situations that are tending to be on like hoarding, like really can't let go. And this is where we take the moment to really honor our ancestors and the previous generations for what they have been through. Because that's where the scarcity mindset, that's where the seeds are sown, because they've been through really traumatic events from like wartime to famine to, Great Depression, where resources were so scarce. And then that gets fed down the lineage. So when we're able to bring that awareness, then that's when we can actually do the work to break the cycle, right? And so, even things like the scarcity mindset would be like, oh, you see a really good deal at Target. It's like, buy 3 for the price of 2, even though you only need 1. But it speaks to us because we're like, oh, I want to get the best deal possible. So when we're able to recognize these, it's like, oh, wait, hang on. Like, do I actually need 3 of these? Or someone who's living alone, but they end up getting like the economy size of things. It's like, that might seem like a good deal, but it isn't, because it's going to probably go to waste. It's probably going to expire before you can use it all up. Right. So like when we're able to recognize where it's coming from, and then again, having that audit of how we want to live our life, and also the inventory. That's a key piece of the knowledge that we need. Because that's another thing that I see all the time, which is a lot of repeat purchases. People can't find the things in their home, so they go and buy it again. Yeah. And that's lost money and time.
Mm-hmm. So taking that another step further, how do you notice that that clutter impacts your clients' lives, or what are the consequences of living in a cluttered environment?
Oh yeah. Like so many. It's like, I mean, aside from just the financial, it's the emotional, because seeing clutter, and this is from a Stanford study, seeing clutter increases anxiety and decreases productivity, right? And our cortisol levels are rising. So especially if you have, let's say, family members as well, you're more prone to being reactive simply from the environment that we're in. And as highly sensitive souls, it's going to impact us a lot more because we're a lot more porous, right? We absorb more too. And yeah, it leads to arguments. We're not able to, be the best versions of ourselves, and we waste a lot of time. The main thing is the time element, because you're wasting time looking for things. We're also, if someone is asking you like, oh, where is this? You don't know where it is. Your cortisol levels are rising. You're being pulled away from whatever task that you're doing too. So it has that domino effect. It might not seem like a big deal, but that's actually what causes the domino effect.
I mean, I think that makes perfect sense. And it's making me think of a book about money mindset. So I love reading money mindset books. And one of my favorites is called The Millionaire Next Door. Are you familiar with it?
I've heard of it, but I'll check it out.
Okay. So it's written by a PhD economist who has since passed. Stanley is his last name. And he talks about how he researches millionaires in the US, and from a data perspective, what the stats have to say about the typical millionaire in the US. And what the research shows is that most of the millionaires in living in our everyday lives, in our everyday communities, are the next day Janes and Joes, like the ones you would least expect to be millionaires, because they're not trying to keep up with the Joneses.
Absolutely.
Because they're not living in the upper middle class neighborhoods and feeling the need or the pressure to drive the luxury cars. They're keeping their cars for decades. And I think it really goes hand in hand with so much of your saying, that they don't experience that societal pressure to keep up or to maintain appearances. They're really clear in their values and their own intentions around how and where and when they want to spend their money.
And you know what?
Save their money.
Exactly. And actually, this is the knowing of who you want to be, right? And then this also circles back into the topic of motherhood too, because we're not trying to keep up with appearances. I mean, so many people told us, they're like, why are you guys going on a gap year? The children are not going to remember. They thought we're absolutely crazy. And we're like, no, we're just going to listen to our inner knowing that this is the path for us. If we had decided, if other people, because we do live in such a noisy world as well, but if we put so much emphasis and like importance and put all of that on a pedestal, we're always going to be, like just basically staying afloat, because you're not grounded in what truly brings you joy. And it's going to look different for each and every one of us. So this is really the practice, right? Like, but how can you know unless you do the work?
And I really appreciate that connection, that what brings us joy, and specifically for those of us who are high sensory and empathic, is a connection with our environment, right? We are so highly attuned to our environments, and whether that is, a beautiful natural space, or being a citizen of the world, or living in a minimalistic environment that allows you to really feel at peace in your physical space. We feel less propensity, less urge to fill it with stuff.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what we need to delve into. It's like, the connection between what's driving our actions. Is it coming from a place of fear, or is it coming from a place of joy and love? right? So even like let's use the luxury items, for example. I always say to my clients, I'm like, are you keeping it because you feel like you need to impress other people? Or are you keeping it because you really love the craftsmanship? Right? Like you can absolutely keep it, but it has to come with that intentionality.
So for those of our listeners who are listening and maybe are still earlier on in their journey around struggling with clutter, and feel this urge to start tidying up, start joyifying their lives.
Yeah.
What does the journey to heal our relationships with clutter look like? How can people start?
Oh, it starts from being gentle with ourselves and set in really carving out the time. We have to commit ourselves. And actually that's the first rule of KonMari. Step number 1 is committing. And that's the way it is with anyone, right? Because thinking, wishing, and wanting, that's not the same as doing. So it starts from committing yourself and really visualizing what your ideal life looks like. And then it's, hey, let's make it manageable, right? Like how I was mentioning earlier about you can divide it by the subcategories as well, because, some of us might have chronic health conditions, then your speed is going to look different. So it's just being really gentle, bringing that awareness, and that's where we start. Because when we infuse and we can hone into the joy of letting go, that's going to fuel us. And we also do release like dopamine, right, as well from doing so.
Yeah, I love that you started there with being gentle with ourselves, because I think a lot of the work that there is for us to do is to integrate our learnings and our insights, which often is the consequence of welcoming them, right? Of allowing them, of embracing and accepting them, not forcing ourselves and muscling through and continuing to judge and shame and put ourselves down. And so I hear how the journey of being gentle with ourselves could be like a loving embrace or an extending hand.
Definitely. And that's where the self-awareness is cultivated too. Because, for example, Kat, you're pregnant too. So you might have like, oh, I'm feeling like revved up. I want to do some joy checking. But then you might be like, oh, you know what? Like I'm feeling physically really tired right now. So it's also being able to give ourselves that grace too, to meet ourselves wherever we are at.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's so easy for our minds to, it takes over as well.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of it as well. But I do love, like, once the foundation is set, you can use this as a self-care practice. Because especially as people who are high sensory too, sometimes like being in front of the computer for too long in front of screens, it can drain us. So I find that just by being able to reset rooms, do a little joy check. It might look like, oh, I have a 5-minute break. I'm going to joy check my t-shirts, something like that. So by using our hands, we're also activating a different part of our brain, and it becomes a form of rest.
Mm-hmm.
So then our homes will support us divinely, like even more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I have loved our conversation. I've been noticing a theme recently that almost many, if not all, of my recent podcast episodes, they've all felt like they were perfect for me, like perfect conversations for me, given the journey and the time of life that I'm in. So I have no doubt this is going to be meaningful and of value for our listeners. And I'd love to close with a question that I ask all my guests, which is, what has supported you in becoming the prosperous empath that you are?
I think, so I follow, this is something that my husband has coined, remember to take your meds, which is meditation, exercise, diet/decluttering. And I threw in the decluttering, I had to. So diet/decluttering and sleep. So remember to take your meds. So yoga and meditation has been a really big part of my life. And also, I know you love reading as well. So some of the books that there's just so many to name, but I love The Go-Giver by Bob Berg.
I
And then
just
I also
bought that book.
Oh, did you? No
haven't
way.
read
And
it yet.
It's so small. And I actually got
Yeah.
that from one of my KonMari clients. So I love the books category because I always get the best recommendations. But yeah, I read that and I was like, oh, so amazing. And then the other book is The Choice by Dr. Edith Eger. I don't know if you've heard of.
I've read that
Those were great. You know, it was just that reminder of befriending our mind, right?
Mm.
And to be able to serve and give generously, it all comes back to taking care of ourselves.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. This has been just like truly delightful and so thought-provoking.
Oh, thank you, Kat. I loved our conversation. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your podcast.
Thank you so much for listening today to this episode of the Prosperous Empath Podcast with me, Catherine Wood. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review so you don't miss an episode and so more empaths just like you and me can find the show. As a thank you, each month, one lucky reviewer will receive a 60-minute coaching session with a member of our Unbounded Potential team. You can find all the show notes and bonus resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Thank you so much for listening and locking arms with me to bring empathy and prosperity back into the world of business.